Okay, so we last left off going over how living things, what characteristics they have, right? And so we already covered how living things are organized. And so let's look next at how living things acquire energy and material. So I'm going to forward over here to this slide right here. So living things acquire material energy. So in order for us to be living, we have to have some source of energy, whether we can't do photosynthesis, but whether an organism is able to do photosynthesis to convert that sun energy into a chemical energy that it can use, or whether we consume food, right? We consume either plants or animals that have consumed plants. So we are able to consume the energy that comes from our food, and that's our building block and energy source, right? But ultimately, the main source of energy that I want you guys to keep in mind is going to be the sun. Right, so let's turn on our pen. Right, so the sun is our main source of energy right here. Because the sun is able to provide that original energy that the producers are able to convert into, like I said, a chemical energy, and then we are able to consume it. And so think about how the energy of flow is only one way. So it goes from the sun all the way from the producer to consumer. And then we will use that energy for digesting our food, for being able to walk, for being able to stand. And a lot of that energy is also lost as heat, right? So that's where a lot of the energy comes as well. So the energy source is one way. So keep in mind that if we did not have the sun, could life still exist on this earth without the sun? Most likely not, right? Because where are we going to get that original source of energy in order for living things to be able to obtain energy themselves and be able to live? Living things also respond. So for all the videos, I'm going to provide with the lecture note, I'll provide a bunch of links of videos. I won't play the videos, it's going to play, but I won't play the videos in the slides themselves, but I will link them and you can go ahead and watch them on your own time. So one way that we respond, living things respond, right? So when we say response, don't just think of like physically moving, right? Response can be how you see things, it can be how you hear things, it can be how you can smell, like, smell baked goods or something like that, right? And so it's the response to your environment. So an example of that is how do we maintain our internal environment? So we have to maintain an internal environment as humans in a very small range in order to survive. And so we're going to talk about that in one of the laboratories, but I want you to think about that. And let's look at these two pictures and kind of see how they respond. So they want to respond to the environment. And if the environment changes, they will respond to a certain way, right? So you can see here that in the seawater, when it's in isoosmotic environment, meaning that we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but meaning that the number of solutes, so for this simplicity, think of solutes as salt. So the amount of salt that's in the environment outside is equal to the amount of salt that's inside this creature as well. The sea cucumber is the same, is going to gain and lose water equally. However, if the salt changes, right? So if it's in fresh water, that means that the amount of salt in this outside environment is way less, right? Because fresh water doesn't have salt in it. But the internal of this sea cucumber has a lot of salt. Then water is going to move where there's a lot of salt. It's going to kind of move to that. And so what you have is a sea cucumber swelling. So this is an example of how this organism is responding to its environment. So think about, I just told you that our bodies has to maintain very small ranges of like pH or temperature, right? Like think about when you have a fever, your temperature only changes technically very little, but that response makes a big difference on how you feel, how your body responds, right? So can you think of other ways that your body responds to maintain homeostasis? Let me give you a few seconds. Okay, so one example is when you are running and you're building your body heat up, what do? Your body is going to sweat, and that's your body's way of being able to cool your body temperature down, right? So that's an example of homeostasis. You want to keep that temperature at a certain range, so your body is going to sweat in order to cool down. How about when you just consume a loaf of bread? What happens then? So your body is sitting here, you haven't eaten anything, you consume this big loaf of bread. That's a lot of sugar that your body's going to receive and start breaking down. So your body's going to respond by having your pancreas maintain that level by secreting different hormones, because it wants to maintain the level of sugar in your blood to be the same, right? It doesn't want this spike, right? You've heard like insulin spike and stuff like that. It doesn't want this spike of glucose all of a sudden hitting your body. So your pancreas is going to respond to that. Okay, so those are two examples of how your body responds to maintain that homeostasis. Okay, another characteristic is living things reproduce and develop. So we can reproduce in two kind of main different ways that we can think about it. Like for humans, we're reproducing by uniting eggs and sperm together, right? And the eggs and sperm, these two single cells are able to combine together and form this embryo, right? This embryo kind of, the cells within the embryo just kind of keeps dividing till eventually forms like a human, right? Bacteria don't breed that way, for example. They don't have like an egg bacteria and a sperm bacteria. So bacteria, they just simply increase their internal, all of their cytoplasm and everything like that, and then they will increase like their DNA, and then they will simply divide and split into two. And so that's how bacteria splits. So bacteria, but both ways we're reproducing, we're increasing, we're reproducing. Humans are more complex, as well as many other eukaryotes, and so we want to be diverse, and so we reproduce by uniting two different individuals that are the same species and uniting them so that we will pass our genes to our offspring. And our genes are made of DNA. And we'll talk about DNA more, but just kind of think that the DNA is the blueprint. So think of yourself as like a blueprint with all the instructions in there, like how to make you. That is your blueprint, right? And so to reproduce, we're spreading our genes and our genetic information, aka we're spreading our DNA. Okay, organisms also can adapt, right? So what I mean by this, well, think about how different birds, and we'll see a picture in a little bit, how they have different beaks, right? And so you have all these different birds. And why do they have those different beaks? Well, they have to adapt to their environment. So, for example, with a hawk, in this first example right here that we are showing you, you have some hawks that can catch fish, right? So some hawks are better at catching fish, and other ones are better at catching rabbits. So those are two very different environments that they're able to consume. And so they have adapted the way they prey, or the way they act as a predator, sorry, and they have adapted with regards to their beaks and their other appendages in order to be able to get better at catching fish or better at catching rabbits, right? And so humans also adapt. So think about when you're here in at sea level that we are at versus when you go to Peru, or you go to Denver, or you go, somewhere where it's like really high elevation. All of a sudden you're a lot more out of breath and you have a harder time. And so your body will actually adapt by making more red blood cells. And by making more red blood cells, it allows you to be able to capture more oxygen so that you can adapt to the change in the environment. Now, that environment, if you're going from sea level here to, let's say, one of the mountains in Colorado, you are going to be out of breath. Your body, and it doesn't happen right away, right? Your body, it has to actually make red blood cells and everything. But once you've been up there and you're acclimated to Colorado and the higher elevation, when you go back to sea level, do you keep those red blood cells? What do you guys think? Well, you'll keep them for a bit, but your body's going to adapt again. So then eventually your body realized, oh, I don't have to make that much red blood cell. I don't need that much. I don't need that amount of oxygen in order to survive. So it will adapt again, and then your the amount of red blood cells you have will go back to what it was at sea level prior, right? And so this is a cute little picture of a bunch of penguins, and these birds are going to be very different than a flamingo, right? So why is it that these are both birds, but like one set can like live really well in the cold, while the other one lives in Florida, which is the opposite of cold, right? And it's because these organisms have changed different things about their physiology in order to be able to adapt. All right. So in the next video, we'll continue with evolution.